All right. Well, I'm so excited about today's session. We're privileged to have two individuals who were trainees on our program a variety of years ago. I'll let them describe exactly how many because I'm pretty sure I'll get it wrong if I try to. It's longer ago, I'm sure, than I would be tempted to think. And but what we'd like to do is to have each one of them begin in succession by giving a little, sort of description of their career from EBA forward, absolutely lessons to connect back to EBA or just life lessons along the way are totally welcome. Anything you want to say about the research, area that you've landed in, and then, we'll look forward to having some time at the end just to have, discussion together. Brian and Michelle, would it be useful to very briefly just run through like the briefest introduction, and so we can get a sense of who's here. So literally, name and then what your role is, on the program. So for myself, I would say I'm Karen Bandine Roach. I'm the director of the EBA program. So Sophia, I see you next.
Oh, yes. Hi. Yes, I'm Sophia Okoye. I am a postdoc fellow in the EBA program.
All right. Jen Deal.
Sorry, muted. Jen Deal, former trainee, associated faculty. Hey, Brian, good to see you.
Carly.
Hi, I'm Carly. I'm a first-year biostats PhD student and EBA trainee.
Thank you. Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle, Associate Director in the EBA and in the Department of Mental Health.
Thank you. Lacey?
Hi, my name is Lacey. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in biostatistics.
Thank you. Grant?
Hi, I'm Grant. I'm a third-year biostats PhD student.
Wonderful. Pat?
I'm Pat. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Mental Health.
Thank you. Ravi?
Hi, I'm Ravi. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Brian. Great to see you. I was a former trainee, just a year ahead of Michelle, actually, in biostats. Had many wonderful conversations. So it's great to see Michelle back again. And Brian, great to see you too. I still remember the lasagna applause.
Oh yeah, that'll feature heavily in my my road to victory. That what we'll be talking about. The lasagna plot.
Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a second-year PhD student in epidemiology.
Thank you. Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison. I'm a third-year PhD candidate in mental health, and I'm not on the EBA, but I'm on the Aging Dementia Training Grant with Dr. Malin Albert.
Wonderful. We're glad you're here. Jian Yu?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jerry. I'm a postdoc working with the Department of Epidemiology.
Great. Chen Li?
Oh, hi, Chen Xu, and I'm one of the associate directors of the program. So I'm in School of Medicine.
Thank you. Amal.
Hey everyone, I'm an EBA alum, and I'm with the Department of Epidemiology as assistant scientist.
Wonderful. Tansu.
Hello everyone. I'm a biostatistician with Center on Aging and Health.
We're glad you're here. Yurun.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yuren Tai. I'm a second-year postdoctoral fellow at epidemiology.
Wonderful. Glad you're here. Nick?
Hi, I'm Nick Reed, assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology in the aging track.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, we're having a little bit of a... So this is what my husband was bringing me. which is actually true.
Happy
So,
birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. So, and Emily.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. I'm a EBA predoctoral fellow, fourth year PhD candidate in mental health.
Wonderful. And I think I got everyone except for Michelle and Bryan. So Michelle Shardell, just briefly, and then we'll go and start with Bryan with his remarks.
Hi, I'm Michelle Shardell. That rhymes. I was told that was done on purpose. I'm an alum of EBA from Biostatistics, and I was a trainee, I think from 2000 to 2004, but then I graduated in 2005.
That's right. Yeah. And then absolutely. So then that brings us to Bryan James. And so we will be opening with Bryan's remarks. I'll let him tell you about his EBA experience, but he's currently Associate Professor of Internal Medicine at Rush Medical College. And, you know, we really thought that given the Zoom, this was an ideal setting to, you know, grab people who aren't right here at Hopkins. So Bryan, thank you so much. Really looking forward to your comments.
Thanks for having me. And just for the record, I am associate professor of internal medicine, but that's only because the society, the Epi research section is in the Department of Medicine for some reason, which I always thought was kind of funny because I study population health, but I'm in the internal medicine department. But anyways, just a quirk of how Rush works. I work at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, so my focus has always been on dementia and cognitive decline at the population level. I graduated from the EBA program, let's see, it was 2009. So I think I know it's getting, so yeah, with a PhD in the Epi of Aging course program, and worked with Tom Glass when he was there. And we mentioned the lasagna plot. I think that might have been one of my highlights of the whole program is I worked with Bruce Swihart, who was a biostatistics student there. And we came up with a way to plot longitudinal data that was, rather than a spaghetti plot, it was looking at kind of layers of people. And yes, it was a 360-degree project. And I think my biggest contribution was coming up with the name of the paper, which was lasagna plot, a saucy alternative to the spaghetti plot. So I remember
it's all in the name, Bryan.
It's what I said. I was like, it's all in the name. I should get but yeah, actually the reviewers liked the name, so that was cool. And I still to this day, like 10 years later, have people being like, oh man, this paper you wrote, such a funny name. I was like, yeah, thanks. Anyways, so that was fun. I really enjoyed the program. Specifically, things that still stay with me to this day are the fundamentals of gerontology, compression of morbidity, and all of these other kind of topics that we kind of take for granted coming from this program. I'm realizing that a lot of other people working in dementia or aging research aren't as familiar with some of these concepts. And so I've had a good time kind of relaying that information that I got from the EBA program to others. And actually, we literally just published a paper, or just got a paper accepted that has the whole concept of compression of morbidity as one of the outcomes. And that was my contribution to the paper, I think. So, so let's see, summary of what I've been doing since then. So I started as a postdoc at Rush right after I graduated. So that was 2009, did that for 2 years, and then rolled into a faculty position there. And I just made associate professor, I believe it was last year. I study lifestyle and life event determinants of cognitive decline and dementia. I currently have a grant. I'm in the last year of my grant. It's a KO1 training grant looking at hospitalizations as a risk factor for dementia. So why some older people go to the hospital and just get on this long-term trajectory downwards. And one of the main themes that I'm trying to impart on people from the work that I do is that it may be a major risk factor at the population level that we don't talk about. When we talk about risk factors for dementia, you almost never hear anyone talk about medical encounters, right? But then you also say, hey, do you know that some older people go to the hospital and never come back the same? And almost everyone will say, oh my God, my grandma had that total, yeah, they went into the hospital and then a year later they had dementia. So it's kind of funny to me that there's this disconnect and we don't recognize this as a population level risk factor. And I guess briefly, the two main findings that came out of my K that I think you might find interesting are, one is that when we broke the hospitalizations down into types of hospitalizations, we found that it was the non-elective hospitalizations only that led to cognitive decline. And so elective procedures like surgeries didn't seem to be related to cognitive decline. Which I think could either argue that it's, getting really, really sick and going to the hospital that puts you on this trajectory, or it may be something about the level of stress involved in those non-elective hospitalizations that lead to that. And then the second thing that I'll talk about is that we showed that there was an interaction between the level of pathology in your brain, so the amount of Alzheimer's in your brain, and the rate of decline that you had after hospitalization. So my idea is that it could be, an additional hit to your brain in addition to the neuropathology that's already building up in your brain. So it's kind of like a synergistic negative effect. Anyways, I kind of went off track talking about my grant just because I find it so interesting and trying to submit R01s now that follow up on this. But also another part of my job that I've found really rewarding is that about 10 years ago, it was right after I got to Rush, I got asked to take part in the Alzheimer's Association annual Facts and Figures report. So when you see that about 5.8 million people have Alzheimer's disease in the United States, that comes from this annual report that I helped to write. So I get to write the prevalence section and the mortality section. And it's just really rewarding seeing so many scientific presentations and the news talk about, give pieces of information that come from this report. But also it's really taught me as a scientist how to communicate research findings to the general public, and in a way they can actually affect policymakers. You have to, I actually got to lobby Congress with some of the work that we did, and go and try to convince people who decide where money should be going that this is an important topic for these reasons. This many people have it, this many people die from it, and the amount of people that die from it may not be accurately reflected in death certificates. So one of the papers that I've written that got the most citations was showing exactly that if you actually look at how many people die from Alzheimer's using an attributable risk model rather than just what's written on people's death certificates, you get about 5 times as many people who died with Alzheimer's contributing. So anyways, I guess the point of that is that I highly recommend getting outside, if you do pursue an academic track, to get outside of just the purely academic track and work with nonprofits and other institutions that allow you to communicate to the general public what you're finding in your research. And then the last thing I'll say that's along that same line is that I also host the Epidemiology Counts podcast. That's the one of the official podcasts of the Society for Epidemiologic Research. And that has been really, really fun. So every episode is a different topic. We've done 6 on coronavirus, but we also have done, can epidemiologists count? Epidemiologists, all we do is count, and we also count. Hey, we count, But anyways, it's been really rewarding. I've learned so much because I'll interview an expert on a topic that I know nothing about. And by the end of that hour, I'll be so much more informed than I was before. And then the last thing I'll say, because I've been rambling here, is that when we did the first coronavirus episode, so one of the 2 experts that I interview is Justin Lessler, who's a professor at Hopkins that I hope some of you have had the chance to learn from or work with. He's also one of my good friends because he was in my cohort in the PhD program. But when we did the very first coronavirus episode, there were 11 cases in the United States. And, it was very eye-opening to do 5 more over the course of this pandemic. And in the intro, I'm always reading out how many people have it, how many people have died from it, and just seeing the exponential increase has been crazy. So yeah, anyways, that's it for me. I'm sure I'll, if there are any questions, I would love to answer them, but I think I've said enough.
Wonderful, Brian. And, maybe why don't we go ahead to Michelle and then we'll open it up for combined questions. Does that sound good? So, Michelle, once again, we're so thrilled that you were able to do this and agreed to do this. At present, Michelle is professor of Epi and Public Health at University of Maryland. But her career has taken her to a few different places of impact, and I'll leave it to you if you choose or not to go into that. Thank you, Michelle.
Sure. And I'll try to emphasize some of the pragmatic aspects, especially for new graduates who are interested in pursuing the academic track, particularly the biostatisticians. And I wrote some notes to stay focused because there's a lot of different avenues that could be traveled. So as I mentioned, I was a biostatistician who was supported on EBA, and what attracted me to the aging training grant as opposed to one of the more disease-specific focused training grants is that aging is something that you get to do if you're lucky, whereas some of those other diseases, that's not what you want. And so there just seemed to be a more hopeful element to the aging training grant, and was hoping that whatever research that I would be involved in would potentially be relevant to anyone I know either now or eventually. So that's how I got there in the first place. I certainly didn't start a biostatistics PhD degree thinking that I would end up being an aging research professional, but here we are. And then one of the things that stood out for me in particular, having gone through EBA with respect to the training, is just learning the vocabulary and the concepts of gerontology, being able to speak that language and be able to connect the dots between some of that epi of aging language with some of the concepts I was learning about in biostatistics, particularly how understanding the content area can help motivate and inform some of the methodologic developments. Because here's where you find out where the real problems are. And that's what can motivate some of your statistical research in trying to solve those very real problems that researchers have and try to answer very real questions about health. One of the challenges that those of you in the biostatistics department may find when after you graduate, and perhaps like myself or Brian who move into a school of medicine, is that biostatistics doesn't necessarily have the same stature in those institutions as it does in Hopkins, because here you are at a top of the food chain university in what is arguably one of the top of the food chain departments. And you don't have to make a case for why what you do is important where you are. Whereas if you're moving into, like where I am, in a Department of Epidemiology and Public Health within a school of medicine, we don't have a PhD degree in biostatistics. So even though I'm in a division of biostatistics, within a Department of Epi, within a school of medicine, my role is generally seen as the person who does power and sample size calculations. So that means in some respects, I have to be a little bit subversive about protecting my time to do biostatistics methodologic work, because it's not necessarily seen as inherently valuable to my collaborators, or maybe not inherently valuable, but maybe not immediately valuable when they've been doing just fine with a lot of the conventional methods that are already available. And it took me a long time to learn how to do this. And so my lessons on what not to do when you start an academic position, particularly within a school of medicine, can be very succinctly summarized by what I did during my first year in academia. And part of this may be because I didn't do a postdoctoral fellowship, so I didn't have those training wheels to help me navigate and learn what the criteria for success were, particularly within a medical school. And so here's how I spent my first year. I published no papers. And the reason why I published no papers is because to do so, that requires a lot of focused time to be creative and be dedicated to one project that other people are not holding me accountable for because it's my own work. And the reason why I didn't have that time or that accountability to my own work is because I was serving as this collaborative statistician on a lot of grant proposals that went in that ended up not getting funded. So at the end of the year, I had no papers to add to my CV, and I had no grant funding success to add to my CV. And at the time, as a new junior faculty, I didn't really understand what the criteria were for grant funding, or what's the difference between a good grant and a bad grant proposal. So it was very much a trial by fire. I went to every single meeting that someone invited me to and was generally a very good, responsive team player. That's good to a point, but beyond a threshold can be detrimental because that stuff takes time and you only have 24 hours in a day. And when you're spending all of your time trying to be helpful to your collaborators, that leaves less time for your own creative work, which leads us back to the fact that I had no productivity during that first year. I was very active, very involved, but I had nothing to show for it on my CV. So those are good examples of what not to do. Oh, and another one, I had no idea about the difference between a hard money or soft money environment. So if you're applying for jobs, find that out right away. Also find out what are the criteria for promotion and tenure. Some of you may find that you want to go to a university that's more of like in an arts and sciences department. Their criteria is going to be very different from a school of medicine, and likely very different from a school of public health. And you need to make sure that what their criteria are line up with what you want to do. So if you're someone who's super, super dedicated to teaching, I would advise not necessarily going to a school of medicine, because you can be the awesomest teacher ever, but if you don't have grant funding and you're not covered, that's only going to matter so much. Whereas if you're in a school of arts and sciences, perhaps, and you're really good at bringing in funding, but you're not teaching, or you're not pulling your weight with teaching, that opposite situation may not be perceived well. So make sure that your interests and goals align with the criteria for success of wherever you end up. So after that first year of making every mistake you could possibly make as a new academician, I started getting it right my second year. And so here's what I did right my second year. And that's that, first of all, I made myself a bit more scarce so that I would have more time to myself. So I actually did have that dedicated, focused time to do work, which would strengthen my CV, but no other individuals necessarily holding me accountable for. Also, I linked up and started collaborating with a couple other junior faculty members who were maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of me. And this was good for 2 reasons. One, they were hungry because they're junior faculty. And so, we all kind of fed off each other and motivated each other to pursue the same goal. Secondly, since they were kind of closer to where I was, they had a better understanding of the kind of context I was in. Oftentimes, senior faculty members, they're super generous and they know the lay of the land really well and can be very helpful. But oftentimes they can be very far removed from what it was like to be a new junior faculty member, that what the different kind of opportunities are that are available. It just may not be on their frontal lobe. Whereas the person who's maybe 2 or 3 years out, maybe like, oh yeah, you should apply for such and such, or you should look into this program. They're going to be much more aware, and those things are going to be much more front and center in their mind of what kind of opportunities to look into. So you're going to have to kind of play both sides, for lack of a better term, of nurturing these collaborations with folks who are a few years ahead of you, as well as also making sure you learn and provide value to the more senior faculty members as well, so that you're generating good relationships across that broad spectrum. Also, I attended a couple of for beginners NIH grant writing seminars, and that was really helpful because that, to the uninitiated, is a very complex system, and understanding what it takes to actually make oneself quote unquote fundable was very helpful for me to prioritize my activities as well. So oftentimes what happens to a new faculty member who moves into a soft money environment is they'll get hit right away with the message of get grant funding, get grant funding, get grant funding. But oftentimes no one tells them that in order to be successful when you seek grant funding, you have to make yourself fundable and have a fundable profile. And that comes from, a lot of the stuff that Bryan was just talking about with, some of the papers he wrote, that received a lot of attention and a lot of positive feedback, and a lot of the other activities and service he's been involved in with his professional society. So making sure that that is already strong before you start applying.
I'm hoping
for
it
grants.
translates into grant funding at some point, though. I've
Well,
been laying that groundwork for a while. I'm like,
but
at some point, the R1's coming, right?
You have a
Yes,
K,
I have
right?
a K, but it's about to run out.
Okay.
And a rejected R01 and another, yeah, but anyways.
Okay. I'll talk about my lessons for that. So hopefully we all can learn from my mistakes. So then, all right, so yeah, so putting those things in place and really understanding that where I was, the single greatest determinant for being considered to be successful or, moving up the promotion and tenure ladder was my grant funding. And so then I needed to focus my activities to ensure the probability of success there. So then at that point I realized, okay, I need to do things to make myself fundable. So I just published and moved product like a drug dealer out the door, for lack of a better analogy. I mean, we just published like crazy. And so that put me in a good position where University of Maryland at the time, they had something known as a K-12 program. And you can think of a K-12 as almost like a T32, but for junior faculty, where the award is given to the institution and the institution picks the individuals to support. And the K-12 that Maryland had, it was called the BIRCH, the Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health. And so fortunately, through this combination of just having a lethal CV and good relationships at multiple levels across the different faculty members, it got to the point where when I applied for it, it was only like a 4-page application. They're like, oh, yours is so good, we're not even going to ask you to give the seminar that we normally ask applicants to give, which I was totally not mad at. So then that gave me 2 years of support, during which point I took a deep breath and realized this isn't very long, so I'm going to have to apply for another K. The problem was there hadn't really been a precedent of biostatisticians at my institution getting Ks. So another good thing to do is if you kind of find yourself in a situation where there isn't really a trail blazed for you at your institution, try to find individuals at different institutions under different environments that are kind of where you want to be, and see if they're willing to share with you. And so fortunately, Brian Caffo was kind enough to share his K-25 application with me because he was the only one I knew at the time who had one. And for those of you who don't know, a K-25, it's a career development award, but it's a quantitative career development award. It's generally given to statisticians, mathematicians, engineers, physicists, those of that nature who want to kind of apply their quantitative field to the health sciences. And so I applied for this K-25. This was right around the time when the NIH was changing around their criteria. So that was super fun to go in one submission with a 25-pager and then have to bring it down to a 12-pager the next time in. It basically just became an arts and crafts project to fit all the information in half the size. And so that ended up getting funded And I'm sure a major reason for that is because Karen was on my advisory committee for that. And so having her name as sort of the statistician working in aging, really strengthened my application. And this also helped because, if you want to apply for a K, they're looking at your productivity with having first author papers, but you need to propose mentors. And so oftentimes you end up doing things in actuality very independently. And so what your mentors are primarily providing for you is their willingness to kind of let you wear their brand, so to speak. And so it's very important that you have a track record of publication with people who you propose as your mentors. And so fortunately, I did have that with some key leaders in aging research, one of whom was at my institution, one of them who was not. And, because we were able to tell this, kind of rock star story in the grant, because so much of grant writing is just marketing. And so I was able to sell that, there is this track record of collaboration and I have all this support and I have all these papers that are along the lines of, what I plan to do anyways. So that really helped me sell it. And so then after being on that K25 and taking a breath for a second, and then realizing, okay, this is not an infinite amount of funding. So I'm going to have to plan, 2 or 3 years ahead for the next grant. So then I applied for an R01 and it got scored, but not funded the first time. And then right when I was going to go back in the second time, a position had opened up in the intramural side of the National Institute on Aging. And, at this time I had a 3-year-old who was super, super clingy, having to spend time writing grants to do the research that I could have done anyways if my salary was just covered. Having to juggle all of that at once made it so that the right decision for me at that time was to take the position at the National Institute on Aging. So I did that in 2014 after being promoted to associate professor with tenure. So I was able to basically go out on a high note, if you remember that episode from Seinfeld. With good relationships with everyone. So then I was at the intramural research program at the NIA for about 5 years until last summer. And during that time, the benefits of being in a government position like that is hard money. So you could just do your work instead of having to first convince someone to give you money to do your work, particularly for biostatisticians or individuals who primarily work with secondary data, where the main component you need is the time, not stuff. And so that was a strength. Another benefit is, since I was there and I wasn't, constantly running around trying to get grant funding, it gave me a lot more time to learn different content areas in aging. And so in particular, when I was at EBA, this was right after the frailty paper was published. And so that was and still is, a major part of the research program and understanding those concepts in the EBA of aging. But while I was at the NIA, I was able to learn more about the biology of aging. So learning more about proteomics and understanding the different kinds of pathologies and cellular senescence. I did the world a favor and never stepped foot in a wet lab, but that would have caused a lot of disasters. But I was able to learn a lot of those concepts and really connect some of those biological and molecular concepts to some of the other, epidemiological and more medical science or health science concepts that I had learned so much about under EBA. So those two things connected, was really helpful, and also really helped me have some time to do some other kind of methodologic research. I think oftentimes, particularly for biostatisticians working in a content area, one of the challenges is that you feel like you have to stay up to date on both kinds of literature, the content area literature as well as the statistics literature. And sometimes you kind of feel like, well, I have to know everything about everything to do anything. It's not the case. What I found was, for me to be very helpful was to kind of pick an area where I feel like it's kind of a blind spot for me, and to just psychotically read all the literature on that one topic and then write a paper about it, whether it's a new methods paper or something where I'm applying a method or, in a different content area, so that, I've developed an expertise and then there's something in my CV that says that I know how to do this. So whether it was, something in machine learning where I wrote a paper on that before it was even cool back in like 2010, because I knew it was a blind spot that I had, and I wanted to learn something about it. And after I spent the time learning something about it, I was like, there's just nothing in my CV that says I know how to do this. So I wrote a paper, applying machine learning to, a study of aging, or, I wanted to learn more about instrumental variables. So I just read everything I could find about it and then wrote a paper about it, so on and so forth. So, don't feel like you have to know everything all the time right away. Just kind of focus on something you want to learn about, develop an expertise to the point where you can actually contribute to that literature, and then move forward from there. It's also more fun that way because you're learning new things and challenging yourself that way as well. So by the time 2019 came around, my son was no longer a clingy 3-year-old. He was a relatively independent 8-year-old who just wanted to play Minecraft all the time. I'm in his room right now. You can see the decor. That's Minecraft. So, at that point, the disadvantages of being in the government started to outweigh the advantages of being in the government. And so I mentioned what the advantages were. The disadvantages are just a lot of the bureaucracy, the very few opportunities for advancement, the general lack of autonomy that you have. And this ties into the bureaucracy, because anytime you want to do something, you have to have it signed off at multiple levels, which sounds minor, but it's very time consuming and very frustrating and takes up a lot of mental energy, where you get to a point where you're like, well, if I'm constantly having to do this, I wouldn't mind going up against a study section for grant funding. So last July, I went back to the University of Maryland School of Medicine as a full professor. And the good thing is, since I was able to leverage what I learned at the NIA on the biology of aging, I'm actually now not only affiliated with the Department of Epidemiology and Public Health, but I'm also in their Institute for Genome Sciences. And one of my collaborators and we recently got a grant funded where I'm the contact PI, where we're looking at the microbiome in the reproductive tract and how that relates to signs and symptoms of the genitourinary syndrome of menopause, so another aging-related condition. And I would not have had the expertise to be able to do that had I not learned what I learned while I was at the NIA, but also had I not learned what I learned, while in EBA and at the University of Maryland the first time about the epi of aging, because I was able to kind of tie this into, we want to be able to account for the epi considerations as well as the, biological considerations, for examining this problem in aging research. And so, fortunately, grant funding has been going well. Right now, I am 3 for 3, and I have another one pending. And so I'm in sort of a wait and see mode there. And so I've just been trying to do those projects while making sure my son actually signs on to virtual education, because he can sometimes forget how when it's time for ELA, but he remarkably remembers how when it's time to, sign on for video games. So that's been my story thus far.
Michelle and Bryan, thank you both so much. I want to just open it up. I have a question in my back pocket if needed, but before I jump in, I want to open it. So Sophia, terrific. Please go for it.
I was just giving applause.
That was a clap, not a hands up.
I misread. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'll try to think of a question. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question? I'll go ahead and dive in then, for both of you, and so in different ways, in both of your presentations, I was struck about the role of passion in being a scientific researcher. So Bryan, in your comments, it came through in terms of you describing your work. You know, your eyes sort of lighted up, and you could tell you just think it's really fun and cool. And Michelle, for you to, you know, go and have a position in the government and then actively come back, you know, to academia, there must be a passion element to it. So, you know, is there anything that you know, would advise junior people who are thinking about their career paths, about, you know, I don't know, either the good aspects of academia or the role of passion? It's just something that really struck me in both of your comments. So Bryan, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, 100%. I think that that is, to me, well, there's two things about the academic career that really, you know, resonate with me. And one is being able to pursue your passion. I mean, you literally can carve your course and say, this is the element that I'm most interested in, and that is what I want to pursue. And not very many careers allow you that opportunity, you know? And then I guess well, we'll just leave it at that. I guess the second thing is related to that, which is that also just the freedom to be able to not just pursue your passion, but also kind of create the model that you think is the appropriate model for yourself. So for example, you know, it was interesting when I was talking to Michelle, it was almost like we had the exact opposite experiences in our early years right out of, because I did the opposite. I did nothing but publish papers. Like I straight up, in my postdoc, I published 10 papers, which was phenomenal, right?
I'm jealous.
And it was really fun, but I did that in lieu of even thinking about grant funding. You know, like I didn't even think about submitting a K until like years after my postdoc was over. I was kind of late on that trajectory. And I also maybe didn't get to collaborate as much as I wanted to. You know, I was really just focused on what are the questions I'm interested in? How do I pursue those questions? How do I write them? And I think I might have not learned to collaborate with others early, you know, as early as I could have. Now I'm in the stage where it's like, that's what I'm really thriving on, is finding other people who are interested in a question and learning how to collaborate with them. But I think that for me took a little bit longer for me to get. So it sounds like you found this group of early investigators early on, and you guys, like Karen's saying in the chat, became this kind of powerhouse trio that you formed your team early. And I'm jealous of that. So, you know, you're jealous of me getting to write but you know, both of those things I think could be chalked up to pursuing your passion. You know, like there's multiple ways, I guess is what I'm saying, to pursue your passion. At the time when I was early, I just wanted to write papers. That's what I liked doing. I had so much fun doing the analyses and getting it out. And so that's what I did. And now at this point in my career, my passion is, I haven't actually written a paper this whole year. First authored. I mean, I've been, you know, co-author on papers, but I haven't first authored a paper yet because one, I submitted 2 grant applications, which almost killed me. But also, the funny thing about this pandemic is it's opened the door to doing things like this, you know, meeting online with collaborators all around the world in a way that I never really did before. And so, you know, I have weekly meetings now with people outside of my institution that I never did before. It was all, you know, I work at a great place. So I had all these great people right down the hall for me that I could just walk out of my door and talk to. And I didn't give myself the opportunity to find the people outside of my institution. So now I'm actually doing that. So, but you know, it doesn't, in some ways you could say I started that a little late, or you might say that was the exact right time for me to do it. So I think there are multiple models and you know, eventually, knock on wood, I'm going to get this grant funding. So the R1s are going to come. I'm not freaking out about it. And, you know, it doesn't really matter where along the way you knock all the milestones off, you know, as long as you're knocking milestones off, you know, other ones can come later. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if some of these differences are just sort of the differences between the expectations of someone coming in with an epi degree versus someone coming in with a biostatistics degree.
That very much could have a lot to do with it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a matter of, you know, maybe you have one thing that's sort of your primary, but you make sure you have time for whatever that secondary is. And that may be different depending on if you're a biostatistician or an epidemiologist. And of course, bearing in mind that we're both speaking from the perspective of individuals who are in schools of medicine. So that may be completely different still from other kinds of institutions. But I 100% agree with what Karen and Brian were saying about the role of passion in all this. One of the things I was talking to a collaborator not too long ago, and they were kind of musing about how when you're a faculty member in academia, in many ways, it's like being a small business owner. Like there's a very entrepreneurial aspect to it. And so that, you know, depending on what your personality type is like, you know, that may be the right thing for you. If you're someone who, you know, likes to have that level of autonomy and decision-making control over what you do. And, you know, depending on your level of risk aversion, if you're in, you know, a soft money versus hard money kind of environment. You know, as I had mentioned before, you know, when my son was very young and I just did not have the bandwidth for it, you know, being in, you know, a place that's more suitable for someone who's risk averse, when I was at the NIA, that made sense at the time. But as, you know, my time started opening up, then I'm like, okay, I'll tap in. Sure, I'll go up against a study section. And so that led to my motivation to wanting to come back and have that level of autonomy and decision-making control back.
Yes, as Spider-Man says, with great responsibility, what is it? Great, I don't remember what it says. With great power comes great responsibility. I kind of feel like that's how it is with academia, right? You have so much independence to do whatever you want, but at the same time, there's not, it's just you, you know, like it's you guiding your way. And if you get lost, you know, you don't have anyone to blame but yourself. So it's kind of like that double-edged sword, you know?
Right, and this kind of gets back to this whole issue of like, you're going to have to be holding yourself accountable.
Yeah.
Because, you know, for your own independent work, you know, no one's going to be emailing you and saying, hey, did you write that paper?
Right.
Whereas, you know, especially for the collaborative biostatisticians, all your collaborators are going to be emailing you, hey, do you have that power section done for my grant? And so, you know, you're going to have to, you know, find ways to sort of keep everyone happy, or at least equally unhappy, so you have time to get your own stuff done as well. So that's, you're walking a very fine line there.
A fine line. And there's also, I think, a grass is always greener aspect. Because I know I've spent time at the RIDC being so jealous of the biostatisticians, because I'm like, they're on everyone's projects. Like they don't even have to write a grant. Look at that. They just get put on 10 different grants, you know. But the flip side of that is maybe, you know, some of them might not be pursuing the thing that they want to pursue because they've got to do 10 other projects. So it's kind of a nice balance of those two is the way to go. And it's hard to find that perfect balance.
Yeah, and following up with Brian's comment about the balance, the way I often describe it to some people is sort of, I'm like a hybrid between a mutual fund and a single stock. So, you know, so the grants where I'm the PI, that's kind of, those are like my single stocks, because that's the stuff where I'm in charge and the buck stops with me. And when that line of grant funding ends out, that's a big chunk of grant funding that goes away. Whereas the mutual fund aspect is sort of that collaborative work where maybe I'm on, you know, 5 to 15% on other people's grants, but you definitely do not want to be that person who's like 5% on 20 grants. Like no one's going to get your A game, and it's just not going to be fun for you. So I think that kind of balance and that hybrid of single stock mutual fund, it's good for, you know, balancing the risks and rewards.
What else? Let's see. Is there anybody who'd like to weigh in?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess both of you talked a lot about sort of what drew you to that academic path and like what you like about it. But I'm wondering if that was something you were sold on from like the moment you entered your PhD programs, and whether or not that was a decision that you struggled with or ever regretted.
I guess I'll go first. For whatever reason, I never questioned it. I mean, the moment, and it was before my PhD, honestly. It was when I started working with my first mentor, Jason Karlowish, at, so many of you in aging may know him, especially if you do Alzheimer's thing. He's at Penn. So when I was at Penn, I started working with him as an undergrad. And I just got so, I mean, when I started volunteering with him, I had no idea what I wanted to do or why. I mean, I think I went into the volunteer office and they're like, there's a job with abortion and a job with Alzheimer's. And I was like, Alzheimer's, boring. So I went to the abortion job and I walked in and they're like, sorry, we just gave another student the volunteer position. I was like, ah. So I was like, I guess I'll work with this guy doing Alzheimer's work. I have no interest in this, right? And then all of a sudden I started working with him and learning about how he comes up with research questions and how he gets data for them. And I was like, this is fascinating. And then on my own, I got fascinated in, because he had me doing interviews with Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers. And I got so interested in how we have almost no idea how to do anything about this disease that so many people have. And from that point on, I caught the bug, and I was like, I want to do something to figure out something about this disease. And I never really questioned it from there on out. So I think I have always questioned, whether the academic career path is the, I mean, I have friends in many other career paths, and I know for a fact, because they put it in my face all the time, I can make a lot more money in other career paths, but to me, it's like money is one thing, but also freedom to not only pursue what you're passionate about, but also, we have freedom in terms of our day-to-day life. If I want to take 2 days off to go spend with my kid, I can do that, and not many people can do that. So there's something to be said about that. And yeah, so I guess the simple question is that, yes, I've second guessed whether my quality of life, is the best it can be, always having to hustle to get grants in. But then you talk to people in other fields and every single field is a hustle. It's like always some kind of challenge that you're up against, some, obstacle you have to get over to get to that next milestone. And in that way, I don't think that getting grant funding is really any different than, any other career in terms of the obstacles you face.
I didn't have quite the forethought that Bryan had when he first started his program. I had no clue what I was going to do when I finished. And I think I'm probably not that different from a lot of other biostatistics students where, you like math, you want to do something practical with it. Biostatistics seems like a cool way to go. But a lot of us just have no idea what you can even do with it after you graduate. And so even when I was finishing up, I had interviewed at, for faculty positions, I interviewed at postdoc positions, and I also interviewed at a pharmaceutical company as well. Figured I would give everything and stay in court. And what struck me was, a conversation I had with a classmate who was a couple of years ahead of me, where when he and I were meeting with some prospective PhD students, and they were asking us about what careers the graduates tend to go into. He had told this prospective student, well, a lot of people end up going into academic positions. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to do about it, because think about it, you're being trained by academicians. They like their jobs. It's elementary selection bias. And so I thought that was a pretty funny quip. But I also thought, hey, it's also a good point, and it may be worthwhile to at least give these other kinds of career tracks, a day in court. So, I interviewed at the pharmaceutical company, and there seemed to be some pros and cons. And so the pros, as Bryan had mentioned, would have been the salary, of course. But the con is that it was just sort of way out in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't really want to do that commute. And it seemed like there was a lot less freedom to do what you wanted to do. And I just didn't necessarily want to have all of my research, because fortunately they do allow you to publish when you're at a pharmaceutical company. I just didn't want everything to be motivated by drug studies. It just didn't seem like an interesting context for me. But that doesn't mean it isn't interesting for others.
As you look back on your trajectory so far, are there any experiences where you're like, whoa, I really dodged a bullet. My goodness, I'm so glad that I did not go down that path. It would have been terrible. And why would it have been terrible for you at that time?
Oh yeah, it sounds like Michelle probably she came armed with them too. But I'll start with mine, and I have to be careful because I can't name any names to protect the innocent. But I will say the biggest bullet I dodged, and part of the reason why you know, I'm already an associate professor and my K is just now ending, is because I was working on an original K idea with an original mentor that it did not work out with. And I'm a very easygoing person, I think, when it comes to working with other people. And so I just naively just assumed that whatever mentor I had or whatever collaborators I had, it'll always be a nice collaborative environment. And boy, was I wrong. I had a very toxic relationship with my initial mentor, and it really didn't go well. And it was hard. I'm the kind of person where I don't want to give up on anything because I feel like it's a failure on my part, and not only on the relationship, but I also didn't want to give up on the idea that I had. But it became very apparent that there was no way for me to implement this project that I had without this one person's buy-in and mentorship. So I realized I had to completely blow it up and go with a totally different area of research and find a new mentor. And boy, it was the best decision I've ever made, because my mentor that I started working with, we have an awesome relationship now. My project turned out to be super interesting to me. I was just telling you guys all about it with, this hospitalization thing that I had no idea that would be something I'd be interested in when I started working at Rush. And here it is now. That seems to be the area that I'm moving into. And I think that if I could have seen myself trying to stick it out and grit it out during that relationship and try to put in a K that might have gotten funded and worked with this person for 5 years, and I may not be in academia at this point, because honestly, it was that trying of an experience, just a year and a half I was working with this person, that it was the one thing in, if you include my PhD program, 15 years of academia, the one time where I said, is this what I want to do with my life? I don't like this. And I had to take a step back and realize it was just this relationship, not academia, that was causing the problem. So if you find yourself in a toxic relationship with a mentor or collaborator, and you really take a step back and realize you just don't enjoy this is just not something you want to do, don't flog yourself. It was painful to have to blow it up, and it caused a lot of bridges to burn and things like that. But in the end, was the absolute best decision I've made in my career. So that's my piece of advice. Don't stick in something just because you're in it already.
I 100% agree. And exactly what you're mentioning, that's the sunk cost fallacy. So don't make the sunk cost fallacy of, I'm already in it, I'm just going to keep going. And so you wisely did not get stuck in that fallacy. So very good for you. And sounds like good for dementia research in general too. Okay, so I'm trying to think. I don't have any, sort of big toxic thing that I dealt with. But I will say that, early on when I was in academia, I noticed that, as much as I liked the other folks who were in the biostatistics division, and, they were good people, they didn't necessarily have the career trajectories that I wanted. And oftentimes you'll hear this saying of, well, if you find out what kind of career you're going to have, look at the professors who are around you, because that's probably who you're going to end up like. And I'm like, well, I have a personal reason for staying in this area. My husband was also in the university at the time. And, but I really don't want to be like these people as much as I like them personally. So what can I do about it? And so basically whenever one of them would give me advice, I would just kind of do the opposite. So for example, I remember meeting with one of them, and, I mentioned, a kind of an issue I was having, and, what kind of advice they had for me. And this is before I kind of came to this realization. And the person said, well, you know, what I usually like to do is, you know, I just keep my head down and, you know, don't, you know, and just work and just try to stay out of it. I just keep my head down. And I was just like, well, that sounds like a good way to not really have control over things. And that's just not how I play the game. So I kind of had to blaze a new trail, which was very different from the other statisticians in my division, and do it in a way that wasn't negative towards them or wasn't critical towards them, because their trajectory may have worked well for them. It was just not what I wanted to do for myself. And this gets back to, you know, if you see other folks who are kind of where you want to go, even if they're outside your institution, either start collaborating or, you know, just kind of be aware of what they're doing to kind of keep going in that direction. You know, where are they publishing? What kind of service are they doing? And if you can strike up a direct collaboration, try to get advice from them. And the example that I had was, you know, when Brian Caffa was kind enough to share his K-25 with me, because I had no one inside my institution that could help. And to this date, I'm the first and only statistician at my institution to ever have a K-25. And so that would not have happened if I wasn't willing to not keep my head down and instead keep my head up, eyes open, and look outside as well. And so in terms of a bullet that was dodged, the bullet that was dodged would be to just shrug my shoulders and say, okay, I guess I'll do what everyone else is doing. So the other thing is, you know, having been both in academia and in the intramural research program, it's easy to kind of play that potential outcomes counterfactual game. Well, what if I never left and I stayed in academia? What would have happened? And so sometimes I'll play that game out, and it's really hard to say whether I would have been better staying in. I could have burnt out having to care for a clingy young child while doing grant funding and everything else, while also dealing with a spouse who was struggling with grant funding as well, and having both of our families not live nearby. You know, and then the other side, you know, maybe I would not have learned some of the content area that I learned about while I was in the NIA. However, then there's that game of, oh, well, maybe my salary would have gone up more quickly, or maybe I would have been, you know, promoted to professor more quickly, or, you know, any other kind of counterfactual what if. So I try not to play that game too much because I can't do anything about it now. It's just a matter of taking the strengths that I have that maybe other people, you know, applying for grants or coming up with scientific ideas don't have, because they don't have both experiences, and just try to leverage what I do have to move forward.
You guys, thank you so very much. And, you know, so I am looking at the clock a little bit and, you know, feeling like we should close out the formal session. But I think the combination of what you had to say, and it didn't occur to me, some of the contrasts that there were that just, I thought worked really, really well. And so grateful to you. Let's please either give a virtual hand or unmic and give a, you know, a real hand. Thank you guys so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.
It's wonderful to see you both.
Great to see you too.
Thank you, Brian and Michelle. Good luck to you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Great to see you all.
Happy
Thank you so
Thanksgiving.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Bye.